Well, hey there, you 12s. You've just watched a video about the police state, and now we're going to have a look at censorship and propaganda. So, if you did some reading over the weekend, you would have read a fair bit about propaganda, but just in case you didn't get that work done, we're going to explore it here. So once Hitler had removed opposition, he had to create a state which believed in and supported Nazi ideals, and this was achieved through the skillful use of propaganda. Um, Under Goebbels, whose Ministry of Propaganda controlled all aspects of the media, the arts, entertainment, and furthermore, the Nazis were determined to also use sport to promote Nazi ideals, most notably through the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics. They also held the Winter Olympics. Fun fact, the last time that both the Summer and Winter Olympics were held in the same year and in the same location was in Germany in 1936. Although the Summer Olympics didn't quite go as Hitler had planned. And so we're going to explore censorship and propaganda in this video right now. So how important was censorship and propaganda to the Nazi regime? Essentially, Goebbels used this Ministry of Public Propaganda and Enlightenment to control the thoughts, to control the beliefs and the opinions of the German people. It was important for the long-term future of the Third Reich, of the Nazi regime, that the majority of the population believed in the ideals. We know that in the last election they didn't have a majority of the vote, and certainly they didn't have an absolute majority, certainly they didn't have all people believing in the ideals of the Nazi Party, and so that's why censorship and propaganda was so important. And essentially, every aspect of the media, censored and skillfully manipulated by Goebbels, used a variety of methods which we're going to run through just now. But Goebbels tried to explain his use of propaganda, and he said this: the finest kind of propaganda does not reveal itself. The best propaganda is that which works invisibly, penetrating every cell of life in such a way that the public has no idea of the aims of the propagandists. So essentially, Goebbels wants to manipulate and to control the ideas and the thoughts of the German people without them even knowing it. And so trying to create this Nazi way of life without even having people realize that that's what's happening to them. So the first area was newspapers. Non-Nazi newspapers and magazines are closed down. The editors are told what they could print. Here's one of the orders from the Ministry of Propaganda in 1935. They said, photos showing members of the Reich government at dining tables in front of rows of bottles must not be published in the future. Why? Well, this has given the absurd impression that members of the government are living it up. Remember that this is a time where the Great Depression is still on, unemployment is still fairly high, and it would be wrong for the Nazis to be seen to be living it up, because they had been complaining for such a long time that the Weimar government, the people who had stabbed them in the back, had been doing exactly the same thing. And so it was really important for them to control the image, that they weren't just living it up, that they were in fact doing it just as poorly as the majority of German people. An interesting way of trying to manipulate the media to only push a certain idea. Next we have the rallies. There was an annual rally held at a place called Nuremberg. Every year, massive rallies, you can see them in the images there, hundreds of thousands of people, and it was designed, well, these rallies were designed to advertise the power of the Nazi state, and the spectacular parades were often held on other special occasions. You had local rallies and marches led by the SA and also by Hitler Youth, but you can see there the massive banners and the platform there where Hitler would speak to the many people there, and this would stretch nice and wide as well. All the flags, the symmetry, it would have been an absolute, if it weren't for the fact that Hitler was saying some pretty random stuff here, it would have been an absolute joy, I guess, to see just the size of the crowd. It was huge, So if you ever have a look for Triumph of the Will, that's a film made by the Nazis basically as a propaganda film to show off these rallies. Pretty interesting stuff. Next we have a picture of Hitler ready to make radio announcements. Love the way that he's combed his hair in that image. But all radio stations were placed under Nazi control, and the Nazis would sell cheap mass-produced radios so that everybody could have a radio in their own home. Sets were installed in cafes and factories, loudspeakers placed in the streets. It was important that the Nazi message was heard. Televisions had been invented by this time, but they weren't used that much. They weren't that important. Some events from the Olympics in 1936 were broadcast, or at least were recorded, but mainly it was radio that was the main means of mass communication. Cinema was quite an interesting choice. Goebbels realised the popularity of the cinema, with over 100 films made every year, audiences topping 250 million people in 1933. And he was one of the first to realise its potential for propaganda. So if you had a film plot, you had to send it to Goebbels, who would check the plot of the film and then rubber stamp it, say, yes, that's something we're okay with being made, or no, go and change it. And Goebbels realised that many Germans were pretty bored, to be honest, with overtly political films. So rather your love story, your thrillers, they're given pro-Nazi slants. Just imagine going to the movies and seeing your latest Nicholas Sparks, film. Zac Efron, he's probably got a shirt off or something like that, and then all of a sudden he's a Nazi supporter, and you name it, whatever happens in the film, something nice happens, love story, oh, Nazis. Where did they come from? Don't know, but Goebbels made sure that they did. One of the best-known films was one called Hitler Jung Quex, made in 1933. It tells the story of a boy who broke away from his communist family to join the Hitler Youth, only then to be murdered by communists. Now, in terms of a plot, really, to try and convince the German people that the communists were out to get the German people, well, you have the Reichstag fire, you have a film like this, the Hitler Jung Quex, that would probably do it. That would convince people, the average German citizen, that perhaps the communists really are out to get all of the normal, average, everyday Germans. Probably most interesting, though, all film performances were accompanied by a 45-minute official newsreel which glorified Hitler and Germany and publicised Nazi achievements. I don't know about you, but I find the ads before a movie pretty boring, and I think they go for a fairly long time, and that's only like 20 minutes before the film gets going. Sitting there for 45 minutes, watching a newsreel about how good Hitler is before your movie even gets started, yeah, interesting. You weren't allowed in if you weren't there right at the start, so you had to make sure, well, the Nazis ensured that you were going to see that full 45-minute newsreel before the movie got underway. So cinema was a really, really useful tool for the Nazis. And here you have an image of Hitler. Look at him, he's concentrating very hard on the movie there. The others contemplating the wonderful things. Here's the film poster for Triumph of the Will, the film I mentioned earlier. Would be worth having a look on YouTube to see if there's something there. And here's the poster for Hitler Jung Quex. Yeah, the young boy running away from the communists there. Obviously he's got his Hitler Youth outfit on, the Nazi armband there as well. So heaps of films being made, all pushing that pro-Nazi message. Of course, then you have the posters, which are cleverly used to put across the Nazi message, and particularly targeting the young. Here you have the Jew, so the Jew, the yellow star, the Star of David. Obviously, the Jews are a big issue. You don't have to read German to be able to tell that. Here you have the kids. Wow, look at Hitler. He'd be a lovely father figure for the fatherland, for Germany. And then, of course, Hitler Youth, brown shirts there. Be proud to be a member of the Hitler Youth. And, of course, the blonde hair, the perfect Aryan race, the perfect specimen. That's the kind of man that you would want to be. Books. Books are an interesting one. They too were also carefully censored and controlled to put across the Nazi message. Encouraged by Goebbels in May 1933, students in Berlin burnt 20,000 books written by Jews, by communists, and anti-Nazi university professors. You might have seen something similar to this in The Book Thief, if you've read the book or watched that movie. The massive bonfire burning all of these books. Many writers were persuaded or forced to write books which praised Hitler's achievements. So no matter where you looked, you were going to be faced with the Nazi message. So here we have a report on the public opinion in Germany, written in 1936. A large section of the population no longer reads a newspaper. Basically, the population has no interest in the newspapers. The Nazis try to turn everyone into committed National Socialists. They will never succeed in that. People tend to turn away from Nazi propaganda. One cannot speak of popular enthusiasm for Nazism. I guess we look at all of these methods of putting the message across, and we would think to ourselves, oh, okay, everyone must have just taken the messages on board and been, all happy with it. But this quote would suggest otherwise, that perhaps people did turn away and ignore the messages being pushed through the propaganda. Either way, though, the propaganda was quite useful in spreading the message and making sure that everybody heard it. So what I want you to do is to make a copy of this table. Here we've got all of the different methods, the radio, newspaper, cinema, posters, books, and rallies. And I want you to make a decision about whether you think they were very effective, quite effective, or not effective. I've made a start to this. I've said that radio was very effective because it was made available to most homes. But I want you to make a decision about the other 5, about where you would put them and why you would put them there. So which of these do you think had the greatest effect and why? I want you to do this in your books. So you might just want to pause the video at this point and then complete this task. When you're done with this bit, then keep going. Don't forget that you've got the Google form to try and complete as well. So you've got a couple of things that you need to get going now. So if I were you, I'd pause the video here, and then once you're done with this, move on to the next stage. Perfect. So thought we'd have a look at a few images. Now I just did a quick little Google search of some images of Hitler looking friendly with people. Here you have Hitler standing next to Ernst Röhm, which, well, obviously this is before the night of the long knives, before Röhm is murdered. Here you have Hitler standing with Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, with Goebbels' family, the 3 kids there. I love these images, these 2 here. Look at Hitler standing with the little girl and posing with the young boy. Love his little hat there. And politicians, I don't know what it is about politicians with babies, but they just seem to love them. I would have thought the politicians nowadays would try and avoid doing what Hitler had done in the past, but there he is, Hitler getting cozy with some babies, obviously trying to show off his fatherly skills. Interesting. Next thing that I want us to have a bit of a look at is how Hitler tried to control the arts. If you have a look here at this piece of artwork, you have the perfect Aryan family. You've got the strong, strapping, blonde man protecting the family, and you've got 4 kids there as well. They all have the blonde hair. That's nice. You've got the mum, whose role is really to nurture the family. Really, her only role is to have more children, and that's quite well depicted in this image. But let's have a look at how Hitler tried to control different areas of the arts. So Goebbels set up the Reich Chamber of Culture, and essentially, if you were a musician or a writer or an actor, you had to be a member of the chamber. If they deemed you, the Chamber of Culture deemed you to be unsuitable, you'd be banned. And many people left Germany in protest at these conditions. So the ones who remained are obviously the members of the Chamber of Culture. So when it comes to music, Hitler hated modern music. He saw jazz, which had been one of the genres that had really grown through the 20s and into the 30s. He saw that as black music, seen as racially inferior, and it was banned. Instead, the Nazis encouraged traditional German folk music, together with the classical music of Bach and Beethoven. Not sure if Bach and Beethoven were happy to be associated with the Nazis, but there you have it, that's what Hitler tried to push. When it came to theatre, a little bit like the films, I suppose, theatre was to concentrate on German history and political drama, and cheap theatre tickets were often available to encourage people to see plays often, again with the Nazi political or racial themes, again trying to push that message across. When it comes to architecture, Hitler had a particular interest in architecture. For public buildings, he wanted the monumental style, large buildings essentially modelled off the same ones that you see in ancient Greece or ancient Rome. They were supposed to show off the power and the might of the Third Reich, to show off just how good Germany was. But when it came to the normal family home or hostels, Hitler wanted the more country style, wanted to get back to the country's roots with traditional buildings, encouraging pride in Germany's past. So you've got the grandeur of the big public buildings, but then the homeliness of the country style buildings. Quite a contrast there. When it came to art, well, we already know Hitler had been living as an artist, hadn't gotten into art school in Vienna. He believed that he was an expert in this area, and he hated with a passion modern art, or any art really that had been developed during the time of the Weimar Republic, because he saw that as backward, he saw it as Jewish, he saw it as unpatriotic, and so it was banned. In its place, though, he encouraged art which highlighted Germany's past greatness and the strength and the power of the Nazi regime. He wanted art to reject the weak and the ugly and to glorify healthy, strong heroes. And so when you see this image, that's exactly what Hitler was trying to get the artists to draw. So you'd see paintings that show the Nazi idea of the simple peasant life. Hard work is heroic. You'd see the simple peasant life, like they're growing their flowers, they've got the food, they're planting some sort of fruit tree or something there. The perfect Aryan young German men and women shown to have perfect bodies. Women are in their preferred role as housewives and as mothers. That was pretty standard for art in this time. Lastly, I want to have a look at how Hitler tried to control sport, particularly with the Berlin 1936 Olympic Games. So, sport was encouraged at school. It was also encouraged in the Hitler Youth because Hitler wanted a healthy and fit nation. Obviously, the boys were seen as the soldiers of the future, and the girls, well, their job when they grew up was to produce as many children as possible. So, really, in order for the Nazi regime to succeed, success in sport had to happen. The major sporting showcase is the 1936 Olympics. Everything about these games was designed to impress the outside world. Remember that Germany was still trying to rebuild itself as a world power. Politically, it had been welcomed back into the international arena. With Hitler in charge, really Hitler wanted to prove to the rest of the world that they had recovered, or at least they were recovering from the Great Depression, but they had recovered from the end of World War I and really was being able to stand on their own 2 feet. They had the media of 49 countries there, and so the Nazis really wanted to show off Germany as a modern, well-organized society. They wanted to prove that the Aryan people were superior, that the pure German people were superior, and for the most part, the Olympics were a pretty good, or even great, public relations success. This is a stadium here in Berlin. Its capacity was the largest in the world at the time and could hold 110,000 spectators. To put that in perspective, the crowd at the grand final last year between the Crows and Richmond would have had nearly 100,000 fans, so another 10,000 on top of that. It's pretty much 2 and a bit full Adelaide Ovals. And so around Berlin, signs declaring Jews not wanted, they were removed, and so foreign visitors got a really positive image of Germany. To boot, Germany won more medals than any other nation, so they topped the medal tally with 33 gold, 26 silver, 30 bronze. Every detail, really, was carefully stage managed and news reports were controlled. And all the filming, mentioned before that radio was the means of communication that was used mostly, and there was some television or some televised events, or at least filmed, and all filming was under the direction of a lady called Leni Riefenstahl. She's the one who directed Triumph of the Will that I mentioned earlier. And all camera crews had to be approved by her, and all of the shots had to be supervised, so as to show off the best that the Nazis could offer. If I just move my face down here a little bit, there's Hitler looking out at the big crowd. You've got the crowd giving their salute to Hitler, the torch relay taking place, the Nazi insignia on a lot of the memorabilia as well. Really, it was a pretty good public relations exercise, except for one particular man. The Berlin Olympics were meant to highlight the superiority of the Aryan race through the success of the German athletes, and certainly the German athletes were successful, but the success of the African-American athletes in the US team, particularly by this guy, by the name of Jesse Owens, they foiled his plan, really. Owens won the 100 metres, the 200 metres, the long jump, and the 4x100 metre relay. He broke 11 Olympic records. He was very popular with the German crowd. If you've seen the film The Book Thief, you'll have noticed that the young boy tries to, put dirt on himself, tries to make himself black so that he can run as fast as Jesse Owens, because people looked up to him. But Hitler was absolutely not amused by all of this. There were 9 other African-American athletes in the US team. Between them, they won another 7 gold medals. Hitler refused to present medals to the African-American athletes. Incidentally, after Owens won the 100-metre sprint, Hitler said this to a Reich youth leader by the name of Bodo van Schirach. Now just imagine Hitler saying this. The Americans should be ashamed of themselves, letting Negroes win their medals for them. I shall not shake hands with this Negro. Do you really think that I will allow myself to be shaking hands with this Negro? Interesting. Very, very interesting the way that he talks about the Negro, Jesse Owens in particular, in relation to, it really foiled the plan. How can you say that the Aryan race are superior when you have an African-American man winning, the 100-metre race? That's the pet event of the Olympics, really, the star-studded event, and one of your German athletes didn't win. So Jesse Owens did a pretty good job at that event. I love my memes. Even if you're literally Hitler, they still let you host the Olympics. Obviously, he wouldn't host another Olympics, and there were no Olympics in 1940 or 44. So, one thing I want us to do before we get to the surprise test for today is to have a think about whether the Nazi state was totalitarian. In the previous video that you should have watched today, I mentioned the word totalitarian, about this idea that Hitler had full control, that all the decisions were made by him as a dictator, and that in itself means that the Nazis were able to transform Germany into a totalitarian state. So what I want us to do is to have a look at these 10 characteristics that define a totalitarian state: a one-party political system, charismatic leader, vision of great destiny for the nation, etc. What I want you to do is to draw up this table and to just make some notes about how you think we see each of these things, how we see them in Nazi Germany. How do we know that what happened in Germany, what happened with the Nazis, means that they were a totalitarian state? So it should take 5 to 10 minutes to do this, and then we'll get stuck into the surprise test number 4, and hopefully it'll go really well. Don't forget to finish off the Google form for this little section of the class as well.